Welcome to Eastlake Online. This is a condensed version of what we do live every Sunday at the Uptown Theater. We know it's not always possible or even preferred to be a part of what we do in person, so that's why we made this. Thanks for checking it out. In just a minute, someone is going to give a short talk that hopefully resonates with you and helps you interpret what it might mean to follow in the way of Jesus, because that's what this community is all about. Figuring out what it might look like to live life the way that Jesus did, except in our current context with like cell phones and self-driving cars and stuff. We're a community where everyone is invited, included, and involved no matter what. And though our physical location is in the budding metropolis of the Tri-Cities, wherever you're watching this from, we want to invite you to bring a bit of heaven into your part of the world. Thanks for catching us on the interwebs. If you're looking for more content, follow us on social media or keep checking our website for all kinds of resources that we hope are helpful. And now, this.
Shine in my mind, another precious moment's gonna pass me by, cause everyone's doing better than me. Hey, hey, I was having a good day.
Well, good morning, welcome to Eastlake, and welcome to those of you online. In fact, for just a second, I'm going to ignore some of the people in the room, and just, not because I don't like you, but it's thank you. If you're watching this online, we have been so impressed and felt loved. We have people writing in comment cards from campuses in Corvallis and Westland, Oregon, and Spokane, and if anything, the pandemic has been one of these things that has kind of separated some of us from a distance, and yet we're glad to have some sort of a connection. So just before I get started with that, thank you so much for being there. Thanks for putting up with that, guys. Thanks for being here this morning in person. For those of you who made it, we are glad that you are here as well. We are continuing a series, part 3 of a series called Trying Not to Suck. It's a 4-part series that will conclude soon, but it's been a series on dysfunction, and maybe you came because of a mailer of a crapping dog or something like that, or maybe it was a friend who said, they're talking about dysfunction, I think you should go, and that could be it too. You needed to hear it or something like that, or just the free coffee, babysitting, whatever the motivation was. We're pumped that you would check it out. We're church people, don't typically like church, or that's our goal, that's our attempt to do so. And my name is Brent. We've been doing 2 parts of this series already. If I get talking on some things and you're like, that doesn't quite make sense, or I'm making some general assumptions, you can always go back to eastlaketricities.com/talks and listen to the first 2 and catch up with the series. But the idea has been that in a lot of different arenas in life, we're always trying not to suck. It's you get to some age at some point when you're lacing up the basketball shoes, and I'm not trying to win anymore, and I'm not necessarily trying to stay healthy. I'm just trying not to suck out there. And you every time you start a new job, your first 30 days, 90 days, 2 years, you're just trying not to suck for a while. You go out on a first date, and you're just like, I just want to be somebody who, when somebody asks her later, did you have fun? And be like, yeah, it wasn't bad, right? You don't want to suck on that. You don't want to be like, God, let me tell you about this guy that I just went out with. You don't want to be that guy. And so you try not to suck in that way. And in all of these different scenarios, there's a couple of things that are like common elements involved in all of these. Sometimes there's unclear expectations. Like I said, you enter into a job and you're like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to do here, but here's kind of what I think is about right. There's limited personal history with these sort of things. I didn't come from this industry. I'm kind of new to this thing. Or there's questionable abilities. I don't know if I have what it takes. I know I put it down on my resume, and I know that's probably why they hired me, but now I'm starting to begin to question if I really do have what it takes in that area. And so we just go through it, and I'm just here, just trying not to suck, right? And so then what happens, though, is then we bring that into sort of a religious realm or a spiritual realm or a church realm, and we show up every once in a while in a scenario like this where somebody like me comes and we say, all right, we're going to talk about Jesus today, or we're going to open up this Bible and look at what it has to say about how to live life and how to live in the way of Jesus or whatever. And we feel sometimes overwhelmed by it. We feel inadequate. We like sometimes there's unclear expectations, like that. There's some limited history. Some of you guys didn't grow up in church, and everybody. You've been to churches before. Everybody knows when to stand, when to sit, and you're just like, how did you know this? What's the process here? What did I miss? And then there's definitely some questionable abilities for us. We look at these things and we're like, I don't know if I have what it takes. And then we turn to our girlfriend, and she's like, yeah, you don't have what it takes, but I'm glad that you're here, right? And so we have all of those, and we just think to ourselves, I'm just trying to do this and trying not to suck in this way. So we said, all right, if that is a general approach or an approach, maybe I didn't describe you there, but you understand how that could kind of possibly be. We are going to look at the teachings of Jesus in this way. And this is what we've said as a part of this church forever, since the beginning. We're not trying to like be a political subgroup. We're not trying to do, I don't know, different things along those lines. What we're trying to do is trying to simply be a community of people looking and reading and investing time on a weekly basis, putting this stuff in front of us to be like, what would it look like to live in the way and the teachings of Jesus in 2021 and beyond? And so with that in mind, we said, all right, we're going to look at the book of Matthew in this series, and not just the book of Matthew, even because Matthew was one attempt. Everything that we know about the person and the teaching of Jesus comes to us from the New Testament, and specifically the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those make up the first four books. And the beauty about Matthew's version, or his version of the story, or his take on the story, is that he's very programmatic. And so he's like, there's basically 5 different teaching discourses. Jesus sits down and he teaches, and here's what he said. And then he goes off and he does some miracles and some healings, and he travels to these different places. Then he sits down and he teaches, and he does this 5 different times. And it feels very much like a college syllabus. So if you ever were the type of person who your favorite day was the day the syllabus was handed out, because you're like, now there's structure, now I feel like I know what's expected of me, you probably would love Matthew, right? That's like a perfect take on this. And inside of this, if you could consider Matthew's writings about Jesus, and look at Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7, it's what's called the Sermon on the Mount, which I believe was not necessarily a day that Matthew sat down with a pen and paper and Jesus is talking. He's like, hang on, could you repeat that? I think later on, Matthew sat down and thought to himself, what do I remember as being kind of characteristic of Jesus' teachings, a summation of his teachings. Over time, this is what I remember. I saw him teach 100 times. He kept coming up and saying these different types of phrases. You're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. You know, he kept using all these kind of common terminology stuff that he said it so many times, I know it. I could write it down. And at the very forefront of, if that's going to kind of be a microcosm of Jesus' teachings as a whole, then what we are gifted at the very beginning in Matthew chapter 5 is a section called the Beatitudes. The common theme that we would know of is blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And there's about 10 of them, 9 of them, 10 of them, depending on how you kind of break it down. And they show up almost as like a virtue list, like this is what it takes to succeed in life, and or this is what it looks like to be blessed in life. And there would always be sort of usually followed up with some sort of a vice list, which shows up in Matthew chapter 23. Woe to you Pharisees, who kind of put all this like expectations on everybody else, and you're not willing to lay a finger. Everybody who tells people how to live their life, but then you're not even doing it yourself. And these virtue vice lists would show up all the time. Common method of teaching. Aristotle had his virtue vice list. Philosophers of that time would always have that. So this is Matthew writing down, I remember what Jesus taught. Here's what he said. It looks like, here's who's blessed. Here's who's lucky. Oh, the luck of the people who find themselves in this situation. Oh, the happiness. There's the word that Makario seems like this, almost like this joyfulness. There's a deep-seated joy in somebody who lives their life in this way. And the crazy thing about Jesus' take on this is it's so anti what we're used to. We would think when we would come up with it, or when we hear a list, blessed is the person whose house is paid off. Can you imagine not having a mortgage payment? Blessed is the person, lucky or happy is the person who has enough of a nest egg to be able to draw upon, retirement. They've entered their golden years and they've done it with good health, and they've got, future before them. They've got grandkids to take care of them, and they got, they can watch them when they want to, but they can send them home when they don't want to change their diaper. You know what I mean? Like that's the happiness. That's the right zone or something like that. And Jesus' list looks nothing like a list that we would come up with. He would say things like, as we said last week, blessed are the poor, or blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who have nothing to kind of point to and be like, my life's good because of this. He's like, what happens with those people is they have nothing to go to. So what do they do as a default? They turn to God. If you're out there, like I'm relying on you, I'm going to need you. And Jesus is like, those people have a leg up on the people who have everything, who have wealth, who have things to point to and be like, I think I'll be okay. They go there by default. We have to choose to get there. That's a difficult kind of spot to be in. So Jesus' thing is almost like an upside down kingdom that he invites his people into. And Matthew says, when I was around Jesus, I just remember him shifting the game, shifting our lens, shifting our focus and our attention on something that's different and inviting us into a new way of life. So what we said was in this series, we are going to look at that invitation to an upside down kingdom. We're going to look at these verses. We're going to go through them. I gave you I printed these out on like a little note sheet inside of your program. I said, take it home with you, read over it. For all of you overachievers, you've read it. For the rest of us, I'm here, man. This is what you get. So take what you can get from me. I showed up, my kids are checked in, and I'm relatively on time. So we are going to walk through and read through a section of this. We're not going to read through all of them. You can read through those. But we're going to read through verse 6 through verse 8 today, because we said 3 through 5 is kind of its own thing of blessed are, we want to work towards the humility of the poor. Like there's something about the humility there's an invitation to humility that is involved in this. And blessed is a person who gets that right. And then in verse 6 through 8, it's going to be this blessed are the ideal, lucky are the people, happy are the people who pursue justice and righteousness in this way. So here's what it says. You're blessed, verse 6, when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink and the best meal that you'll ever eat. You're blessed when you care at the moment of being careful. You find yourself cared for. You're blessed when you get inside your world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. And this is a translation from Eugene Peterson, the Message version of it. You probably grew up in a different translation. Those ones, NIV specifically, is this idea of blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. So that's the translation. It's pretty common in that way. And what we said was we are going to read these things with a critical look at our own life, with an awareness of our shortcomings in this way. And I included a quote by John Ruskin at the very bottom of this as kind of a motivation for us as we read through these and as we compare what the ideal is versus what reality is for us, right? And oftentimes going like, I want to be more humble. I want to be more merciful. I want to be more this, but help me in my shortcomings. Help me with my unbelief. Do what you can and confess frankly what you are unable to do. Neither let your effort be shortened for fear of failure, nor your confession silenced for fear of shame. All right, verse 6, we're going to dive into this first one real quick, and then we'll kind of continue on. We'll go through the next two a little bit faster. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled. Or in Eugene Peterson's case, you're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink, the best meal you ever eat. This imagery of food and sustenance and joy and happiness that comes from a full belly, but then also just like a sustainability of life. And then this term, this idea of hungering and thirsting for righteousness or justice or whatever. I mentioned a subtle shift in Matthew's version of the Beatitudes versus another gospel writer whose name was Luke. Luke had a version of the Beatitudes that is a little bit different, and I pointed out in the very first one, it shows up right away, because where Matthew writes, blessed are the poor in spirit, Luke writes, blessed are the poor. And those are two very, very different things. He doesn't include spirit. So did Matthew add spirit, or did Luke omit in spirit? Because it very much means different things. Blessed are the poor has to do with financial, welfare. Blessed are the poor in spirit means you can be wealthy, but like not great off in your spirit. And we've seen this. And this feels sometimes more applicable to us, because we look around our world, the odds are you don't know a lot of genuinely poor people. I mean, you have to travel to third world countries to kind of see true poverty, right? And so when we look, we see a lot of wealthy people who are poor in spirit. And when we see that, we see those numbers in spades. So that kind of feels a little bit more relevant to us, and yet the question becomes, who is right, or what did Jesus actually say? Is he talking about poverty? Is he talking about poverty of mental health or whatever in this way? Luke's Jesus sounds a little different than Matthew's Jesus. In this verse here now, Matthew says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, whereas Luke says, blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. So again, this omission and this clear kind of movement towards something a little bit different. I mean, Luke's Jesus kind of sounds like he's read some Karl Marx, and Matthew's Jesus sounds like he grew up in church, right? Hunger and thirst after righteousness, blessed are the poor in spirit. And Luke's like, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who are hungry. What's true, or what did Jesus actually say? Or what's going on here? Has Matthew spiritualized an originally socioeconomic issue? And has Matthew done what the church has often done, taken a real life issue and made it spiritual, and therefore somewhat removed a sense of responsibility for being a part of the solution? Have we said, the problem is, sin or something spiritual that if you'll just pray enough or read enough, then you'll have it. Or Brent, have you revealed your hand in citing Matthew's verses over Luke's, right? Have you, by selecting Matthew's text instead of Luke's, are you communicating something to us? And I think the difference is probably in what we think of when we think of the word righteousness. And if you've been a part of Eastlake for any length of time, you know that I've said this before in kind of talks on righteousness and justice, that the same Greek word is used to translate, shows up as righteousness in some texts and then justice in some texts. It's still diakonos either way. It's almost an attempt at the author to be like, what's the best context for this? Are they hungering and thirsting for righteousness, or are they hungering and thirsting for justice? Let me read those again for you. I'll slow it down and let you feel and sense the difference between what is being invited, what are we being invited into, or what is this saying kind of trying to communicate. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. There's almost a sense then we almost add in parentheses, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for personal righteousness. Blessed are those who focus and thirst for social justice. One seems to be telling you that you should join a Bible study, and the other one sounds like it should be telling you to picket at John Dam Plaza, right? So what do we do? What's right? What did Jesus actually say? And or is this Luke remembering his version one way and Matthew remembering his another way? Because again, I don't think it was like Jesus specifically said something in that moment. And I think for them it was just an interpretation, the grid through which and the lens through which they listened to Jesus and what he said. Is this simply a case of we see and read what we want to see and read? And sometimes we point to the data and we can come with our own internal bias and interpret things exactly different ways. And we go, yes, that justifies my take. And the other person on the other side goes, that justifies my take. We're all looking at the same data. Like this week, for instance, you probably saw this in the news, but the FBI came out and reported a 30% steep increase in the murder rate in America in 2020. 30% increase in 1 year. Biggest increase in the 60 years that they've been measuring this thing. Now, there's some that would say, well, yeah, but let's caution this with, it's also less than, the overall rate is less than what it was in 91, 92, which kind of sounds like we're putting frosting on a turd and calling it a maple bar and being like, it's okay, it's a maple bar. And you're like, it sounds like a turd, you know what I mean? I'm still not going to eat it. It's not great. So then the question becomes, well, why? And that's where it begins to kind of, if this is the true data, and we think that it is, right? There's no reason for it not to be true. Then what happens is Fox News and everybody else takes their angles on why this data is the way that it is. And it's either this is a result of some defund the police sort of anti-police sort of systems, or it's an example of more gun violence. And so it's the same thing. It's two different people coming at it. And which one is it? So here's what I figured we would do today. We're going to do a little social experiment. You're going to raise your hand and say which one you think it is. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you. It's not the kind of church that we are. But I say that because it's a touchy subject that kind of shows you a little bit about what's going on with this. Like Matthew and Luke are taking kind of these two different things. Now, the reality is, and I'll come at it in this way, I don't think that Matthew's take is as far off from Luke's as it looks at first glance. Because when you look at what Matthew includes as a follow-up to these next three, there's a way that you could read that as, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after personal righteousness, who grab one of those free books and in the lobby is a Bible and just read through it, right? And they're just like, man, I've been watching so many YouTube sermon videos, and you're like, oh man, hunger and thirsting after spiritual righteousness. I guess, whatever. But that's, when you look at what he kind of follows it up with, blessed then are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. What does it take to be merciful? It means to be in a position of power, to be able to have mercy, to be able to offer to somebody. So it's a proper use of power in that way, which then leans itself towards justice. And then in the final one, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. What does it mean to be pure in heart? It has to do with like a sense of motives. Jesus would say in other kind of scenarios, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Be generous on this one side, but don't even think about it. Don't even talk about it. How often are we when we give, we want to let people know it's, this is why they do fundraisers in public settings, right? And they raise a paddle. What am I raising a paddle for? This is how cool I am, right? And I mean, it's fine. I want to raise money for nonprofits. I'm all on board for that. But there is a sense in which it is for show, like the motives are in question, and nonprofits are typically fine with playing to the egos of rich people to be able to make these things happen. But then Jesus comes along and goes, blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those whose motives are pure, for they will begin to see the world the way that God sees the world or sees them, right? And so this is all about like this sense of injustice in the world and the Christian's role in kind of being a part of a solution to this thing. Blessed are those who see themselves, who out of the humility of the true poverty that we find ourselves in, then take whatever resources that we do have and leverage it towards justice in the world. I think that's Jesus is kind of leaning in this direction. Now, there's a caution. There's what about it can go too far in this way? But because then the question becomes, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Or what exactly are we hoping for? Which is a legitimate question, Brent. If you're saying to me that this is an invitation to live with a sense of, okay, I can't just be about me. It's got to be about something else. And what exactly? I want to know specifics. What do you want from me to be able to do? Not an unrealistic request. Because when I say I want to get better at something, I have to if I'm going to do a goal setting thing, I have to like put some things down in place to be able to be like, what does it mean to be better in this way? I can't just say, I can say it, but if I just wanted to say, I just want to be better at golf, right? Speaking of a golf game, right? I can say, I want to be better at golf, which is a very, very general thing. Or I could say, I want to be better at golf than my friend Ryan, who was up here singing just a few minutes ago. That's more specific. And on Friday afternoon, I got a chance to see my hopes become reality in carrying the team in that way, which is great. That's really, really great. And then I have a microphone to be able to talk about it and brag. And my motives are pure because I want to tell you. No, I'm just kidding. My motives are not pure in that. Those are impure motives, but it is ego-driven. It happens. So there is a sense in which, okay, when it comes to, Brent, you want me to, Brent doesn't want you. Jesus wants you to. I'm just reading for us. Jesus wants me to invites me into this new way of doing it. I don't want to suck at this kind of stuff. I do have sometimes unclear expectations. This kind of is going to speak to that. I do have kind of a limited history in this. Typically, my life has been spent about myself and building up my own kingdom, and then I'm just not sure that I've got the abilities. I'm questioning in this way. So then, what does it look like, and how exactly should I hunger and thirst for righteousness or justice? How do I not suck in this area? What exactly are we hoping for? And an answer that comes in the form of simply just justice. I just want justice. That's unfortunately that's kind of the opposite pendulum swing for us, that we have to kind of figure this out. Justice, and then we go, okay, great. In what form would you like this to be done? And the answer is in all forms, right? And a lot of times in our arena, it becomes like this. In all forms, to put limitations on what qualifies as justice. Is it in itself an injustice? Our hope for injustice, or our hope for justice must be and must remain undetermined. To go about it any other way is to do violence to justice. So what do you want? I want immediate justice. Okay, I don't want us to have to think about it. I would like to not even have to bring it up. Okay, great. And then how would you, what kind of parameters? I don't want it codified because I don't want you to do it out of obligation or to avoid getting fired because of cancel culture or being let go of your job or put in jail or whatever. I want it to be non-codified. I just want good people to be good people, right? And I want injustice to be whatever I can define it as. And as soon as I put limitations on it, then I can't, then all of a sudden, I'm not exactly, I don't have the power to be able to kind of discern it in different ways or to be able to add on to this and to totally makes this thing happen. And so I know it when I see it, which is that famous line from the Supreme Court justice who was fighting obscene porn and trying to define this, what qualifies as should be censored and not censored with the First Amendment rights back in the 60s. And it's that justice's response that I'll know it when I see it. And that's the problem. Is that what we do? Is that the end game of this thing? How do we avoid it? It's really hard to not feel like I'm trying not to suck if that's the end goal is like this. There's no parameters. There's no, the end goal is unclear. It's just a world in which it's immediate and that there are no boundaries, because to put boundaries on it would be to limit it in this way. That's a really difficult thing. I'm the kind of person who, when you want to introduce me to a board game and you play out and lay out all the pieces and you say, here's the money that you start with or the coins and here's the player and here's the way that the board works, my immediate question is, cool, how do you win, right? What's the end goal? When is it all over? Do we just play until at the end, or is there a way to? I need to know. Just keep playing. I'll tell you. This is the. We invited a guy to come play poker once. Well, this is not in my notes, so I might botch the story up. But it was a dealer's choice game. So you just all just a couple of guys. It's Friday night or whatever. And we're doing this, and he comes up with this game, and then everybody throws a couple dollars in or whatever like this, and then all of a sudden he goes, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. Like threes are wild. This is how this works." Everybody's like, "Oh whoa, hey now." It's not how you play these games. Like, you're going to have to tell me before. You can't just be changing the game on me. It's not cool, bud. You know what I mean? And then it was just like, he never got invited back. That's what happens when you play like that. It's not fun for anybody to be able to do this. And so there's a sense in which I'm trying not to suck at injustice and then to just throw it out there and be like, I'll let you know what it is when I see it, and to not codify it in this. But that's the hard part. So like as a Christian, like we're caught in this. We live in this in-between thing where we know there's an obligation, and unfortunately the church has been rightly criticized in the past for not doing enough, for living with when Jesus says to these people around him one day when he's healing people, like the poor you will always have with you, right? It's like, well, we can't really solve it, so let's not do anything with it. Or this whole otherworldly, we someday we die and we get to escape this mess and we get to get out and go to heaven and it's all over and done with. And then if it's all escapism, then why would I need to clean up this mess? If we're moving from this house, then why do I need to clean it? If we don't own it, if we're just a rental, if this is just a rental, then we just kind of leave it in bad shape because who cares? It's not ours, right? So that's the problem that the church is kind of faced with. And then, but on the opposite side of things, it's sometimes this unclear telos, what's the end goal? The end goal oftentimes is get people to think like me, vote like me, and then we'll be fine, right? We can legislate this through. We can, technology will help us achieve it, progress. Once we all start thinking rationally, and rationally means like me, then we'll be just fine. And that doesn't really take into account the brokenness of sin and how that kind of jars everything in this way. So the Christian approach is somewhere in the middle to this, and it's Jesus saying all of this, going, you're lucky when you get this right. You're lucky when you hunger and thirst for justice. You're lucky when you're merciful and you're pure in heart. God, help me to do this. I want to do this, but I'm just like, I'm so falling short. I'm feeling like there's inadequacy involved in either my personal responsibility or unclear expectations or whatever. Which is why Paul is so insightful, and this is going to show up over and over again in New Testament scripture as these New Testament authors begin to wrestle with this idea, living in a broken world themselves, writing in Romans chapter 8 about how this all kind of culminates into a solution. Or what is the telos? The telos is clear from a Christian perspective, right? From a biblical Christian perspective. In Romans 8, he talks about creation groaning as it waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. That someday this is all set right. That the end goal, the telos, is that someday Christ sets this right out of his grace for us, not because we've earned it or we've done enough for him to finally set things in motion. But there is a level of brokenness that we cannot overcome and will never overachieve. That help comes, but it is external to us. It is not internal. It is not when we get our act together. It has nothing to do with our act at all. So in 1 Corinthians, when Paul writes again in chapter 15, or more specifically and more tangibly in Revelation 21, talking about a new heaven or new earth, there's these words that go on to describe this world with no pain and no crying and no tears. And it talks about all of the things that we value so highly are treated like this is an assumption that it's there. This is why there's talk about streets of gold. I really don't genuinely think that there's like streets of gold in this new heaven or new earth. I just think that when we think of gold, we're like, we keep it in a safe. And they're like, it's so, those things that we value are so ubiquitous that you like walk on them and don't even realize it. I don't think you're going to get to me like, hey, I was promised streets of gold. He doesn't look like anything like that. He's going to be like, no. All the things that you were like, I just want a world where justice is immediate. I want it where it's not codified. People just do it because they're supposed to do it and because there's a moral obligation to be able to do that kind of stuff. I think that that's all true and built into you and created in you, and we do want that, absolutely. And in the closing phrases, many times the biblical authors attempt to discuss this idea of a world that is set aright through the grace of Christ, through the grace of God in our world, that the promise of ultimate redemption finally appears. There's like this closing little tagline that always shows up. And the Latin word there is Maranatha, or sometimes it shows up as just, it's translated in American as come, Jesus, come. So here's our prayer, here's our cry, oh God, why is this like this? come. This eager anticipation. This eager anticipation that does not exclude us from having a part to play in the here and the now, which is why when Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, he says, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That this isn't a rental, that we have to be a part of that. There's a redemption that comes as a part of this, that what is coming is a continuation of this. Therefore, the injustices that we fight, therefore, the act of wearing love in the way that we can in the here and now speaks to something that is important to us, that we are invited into, that we are blessed when we figure out what that looks like in our life. And yet we live with this tension of we'll never fully get it right, that ultimately it comes from the external. Essentially, we're taking action from both sides, and both sides are saying, not enough, not good enough for us, right? On the super left or the super right, it's like the Jesus option doesn't fall into either of those two categories. It's something wholly other. It's something anti all of that. Well, here's the way to do it. Jesus is like, the invitation is to a different way. To work hard at fighting injustice because your life will be blessed because of it. But also to recognize that we live waiting, craving, groaning towards, like creation, like all of creation, not just humans, all of creation, groaning and waiting for a day of ultimate redemption in this way. So what are we waiting for? Progress, technology, rationality? No. Is there anything within our track record of history that would give us some sort of a positive outlook like we've made progress? I mean, good grief, right? What does Christian hope look like exactly? How does it exactly play out? I think there's some indeterminacy there. I think that I don't know. I think that we're humble enough to be like, well, there's like some clues in Revelation. There's some clues in some of these talks of Romans and 1 Corinthians and whatever, but really we don't know. To define it would be to kind of probably lock ourselves into something. So there's indeterminacy works in this way, but we know what the end goal for us is. We know what the end goal for us. And what is this hope grounded in? Why do we have why if you're not really religious, a good common critique of this kind of an attitude would be like, well, what do you have to go off of? I mean, what really do you have anything? What we have is simply a revelation of God's history of working with mankind, of his continued faithfulness in spite of our jerkiness, or whatever you want to call it, in spite of our rejection of him, that he never abandoned his people, he never abandons his promise, that he continually comes through, and he comes through, and he comes through, in the promise of his continued faithfulness. What do we have to go off of? Just a track record of a God who who has reached into humanity several times, both through Israel and through the incarnate Christ, and said, and I promise that I'm not going to let this thing go to waste, that this thing all has a point, that it has an end, and that someday things are set aright. And we will exist and live in a place and in a moment where that justice is immediate, that it is defined, that it is abundant, that is free, that is not, people don't do what they do because they have to do it to avoid getting canceled or avoid this, but they do it because of a genuine care for other people. And that, I think, is the way to begin to read verses 6 through 8 in this way. It's an invitation to do that part now, to practice it now. As Jesus said to his disciples, you'll be happier when you do this. You'll be happier when you show mercy to others, because you'll be shown mercy. You'll be happy when you hunger and thirst for righteousness or justice, and you'll be happy when you do it with pure motives. But again, as we evaluate and look at this with our own life, do what I can. God, help me to do what I can this week to be able to live that out and to confess frankly when I'm unable to do so. And neither let my effort be shortened for fear of failure, nor my confession silenced for fear of shame. Let's pray. Father, that is our prayer. That is what you've invited us into and called us into, and it is challenging. And may we be the type of people who individually get this right, corporately live this out as a body of Christ, as a representation of your church, and as the people of Christ, and living and hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Give us clear pictures of what that is, and let us never lose sight of the end goal and the end game, that you've got this all under control anyways, and let us rely heavily on the promise that you are involved and never walk away from us. Give us the wisdom to know what that looks like in our lives, the courage to act on it in your name. Amen. Amen. All right. Here's the plan for the rest of this series in case you're following along with this. So next week, Lauren is going to come and continue this, kind of do like a little sidestep on it. And then I'll be back on the 17th to do the part 4 and finale of the series. We'll do communion and make that whole thing happen. Next week, the reason I'm gone is our leadership team is getting out of town and doing like a little board retreat, planning, every time, if you own a small business or whatever, the pandemic has kind of thrown everything up on the throwing all your plans out, and then you kind of be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then we had this plan going into this, and then we relaunched, and we've been, now about a month and a half into this. We've done the mailer, we've done opened up some kids' rooms and everything else. And now we're in this position again where we've got to go back and dream it all back up. Now that we know what we have and who's with us and what our resources look like, what's the plan, what's the next step? So if you call East Lake home, and this is kind of where you're at, then we'd love for you to kind of be praying for us next weekend as we kind of think through this and try and continue to be what's the next evolution and what does it look like for church, for people who don't typically like church in this way. So, and then if you're a guest, no obligation to pray for us. You can do whatever you want to do, but we'd love to have you back next week. All right, Connect card inside of your program is a next step. It looks just like this, spot on the back to be able to mark down some next steps, spot for some prayer requests if you got something you're going through, or life updates or whatever. The easiest version, really honestly, is to download the app and do it e-version. It helps us, it helps you. You don't have to get cramps in your fingers from writing, and we don't have to type it back out. So that'd be great. On the front side is a spot for some personal information. This is our only way of tracking who has or hasn't been here, so we do ask everyone to fill one of these out. If you're a guest with us, make sure to mark that box on the lower left-hand side that says first or second-time guest. We donate money to a different good nonprofit doing good things locally and globally, and for the month of October, guys, it's October, we are donating money to U Medical, an organization in Kennewick Pasco. They've got 2 campuses actually, and they're working with expecting moms, teen moms, and doing counseling and resources. They got a cool boutique. They give clothes and diapers and all kinds of stuff away. They do ultrasounds for them and help make good decisions or educated decisions on all of the things involved with kiddos and family planning. So let us know that you're here so you know how much to donate to them. That'd be great. And there's also a giving envelope if East Lake's home for you. This is your chance to help us out financially to continue to create a church for people who don't typically like church. You can drop all of those things in the blue bins at the top of the ramp as you're leaving. We'll make sure they get to the right spot. The only other announcement is that Eric mentioned a 101 happening. We try and do these every couple of months or so, and it's been a while because of hosting people in homes and all that kind of stuff. But a chance to hear about the history of when we started, why we started, what keeps us going, who the leadership team is, who makes the decisions, and all of those things. So if East Lake is starting to feel like a place where you want to be rooted and have your family here or friends here or whatever, we totally would love to invite you out. There is limited space available because it's at my house and it's not that big and my driveway is really small. So let us know that you're here, and then if we have like an abundance of people, we'll try and do another one as soon as we can after that and get that rotation going. So that's it. Would you stand? I'm going to read a benediction for you and get you on your way. Here's what it says. Lord, grant that our actions hold a mirror to our prayers. Amen. It's short and sweet, but it is not easy. So good luck this week living that out in your life, but it is a good prayer. If we've never met, I'll be in the lobby. Would love to say